All right, we're back. 5, 4, 3, 2. Let's get to this. Hey, welcome to the altar, everybody. It's me, your host, Colby Martin, and this is my weekly live show where we focus on shifting our perspective. We'll call back to the old school when it used to be called perspective shift. Shifting our perspective and sacrificing those beliefs that need altering. So every once in a while in life, it makes good sense to evaluate and examine and investigate the things which we believe, the ideas that we have in our head. And occasionally, we might come to the conclusion that those beliefs need altering. They need changing. We need to shift away from what we used to think, believe, and feel. And so this show investigates that. What are the things that we need to lay down on the altar of transformation? What are the things that we need to alter in our minds for the sake of growth? So that's what this is all about. Welcome to the altar. Glad you're here. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the encouragement. Mercy loves the new intro, as do I. It was time for a change. And Brooke loves the new name. I agree. Thank you. It's a good name. It's a solid name. Last week on the show, I talked a little bit about the change in name. If you've been with me for a while, you might know that I've called this perspective shift for like 6, 7, 8 months. But perspective shift is really primarily my weekly newsletter, which I'll get to here in a minute. And it just got confusing to have perspective shift be a newsletter and a live show. What? No. So anyway, the live show is now the altar with an E. That's what we're doing here today. So at the top of the show in the countdown, I asked you a question. I said, where's home for you? And do you live there now? And then my thinking is like, you know how people ask you like where you're from? You might, I think more often than not, we maybe respond to that with like the hometown that we grew up in, maybe where we were born. But it's not always do we answer where we are currently living when people say, where are you from? So I'm just intrigued by that. At what point do you, if you have, moved from answering that question of like, where's home for you or where you're from? Like, do you answer where you live now or do you answer where you grew up? And maybe for some of you watching, that's one and the same. That's one and the same. I get that as a millennial, an elder millennial, but a millennial nonetheless, part of a generation where moving is the norm, right? So my parents' generation and definitely their parents' generation, more or less, you kind of born, raised, grow up in the same place. But now the world has shrunk and we have access to resources where we can just move all the time. It's just less and less, I think, people are into their adulthood in the same places in which they were a youth. So anyway, so that was my question. A couple of you gave some responses here. What do we got? So Shane says, home, not really sure. On one hand, it's where I live now. On the other hand, it's more of a wider, more ethereal place. I suppose I'm most home in my body. Oh, look at you, Shane, coming in hot with some trans-rational answers. I like that. Home is not where the heart is. Home is where the heart is. Didn't really make sense. Mercy says, not sure where home is. Wisconsin, I guess, living in Minneapolis now. Yeah, so Mercy, that's interesting, isn't it? Not even entirely sure how to answer that question, right? Where is home? Is Wisconsin where you were born, raised? Like, why is that maybe where you think it might be, even though you live in Minneapolis now? Hi, Odette. Glad you're here. Paul Lee's in California, Orange County, born and raised. It's awesome, Paul. Glad you're here. John, I am almost certainly going to butcher this. Tamaki Makarao Aotearoa. Donde? Where is that, John? And is that where, like, how is that where you are now? Is that where you were born and raised? How does that fit within your context of home? Curious about that. Bethany says, hey yo, Bethany. This is a weird question for me because I'm moving to Portland on Friday. You are? Well, congratulations. What's taking you there? Family, work, just excitement about a new city? That's great. She says, so nothing really feels like home right now. I get that. So for you, thinking about like where you were born and raised, when people say where's home, that's not necessarily what comes up for you. Starkovich, what's up, Starkovich? Good to see you. I feel like you haven't been here in a couple weeks. Glad you're here, man. I'm from MS, but Texas is where I am now for over 20 years now. It's home. So that's where I think that's how I would start to answer this. Like, I'm from Oregon, but now that I've been here in San Diego for 9 years, this feels like home. So when I'm traveling and people say, where you from? Like, San Diego. That's where I'm from. Hello, Anna. Anna says, grew up in Minnesota and still live here. Moved to Chicago for college, but Minnesota will always be home. Love that. No, Shane, maybe you misunderstood the question. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. You answered it how you wanted to answer it. And I love that. Hi, Melanie. Glad you're here from Erie, Pennsylvania. Mike says, I feel like Atlanta, the ATL is home, even though I moved here from St. Louis 6 years ago. Kind of strange not calling St. Louis home anymore. Yeah. So 6 years for you feels like enough time to now feel like Atlanta is home. This is what I'm curious about. I love it. Brooke has always lived in the same 5-mile radius in Hertfordshire. That's pretty cool. Staying close to home. Angelo says, homes, Manila, Madrid, Manhattan. Can't choose. Just as long as they start with an M, right, Angelo? Great God for you. I think if I got your handle right there. Originally from heaven. Wait a minute. I see what you did there. Came into existence in the state of Illinois. Moved over 80 times. Currently in Memphis, Texas. Good gravy. Great God for you. What was the root cause of all those moves? That's a lot. Oh, and then you clarified your name as Roger. Thanks, Brooke, for correcting my pronunciation. Hertfordshire. I said Shire. That's right. As in the Shire. I really wanted you to live with Bilbo. I think that's what was going on there. Bethany, you're moving because you want to move. It's great. Though you do have a job in Portland. Love that. Well, enjoy Portland. I born and raised in Albany, which is about an hour and a half south of Portland, and then went to college and worked in Salem, which is kind of in between Portland and Albany for a while. And Portland's a great city. I think you'll dig it there. All right. Speaking of digging, that was a weird transition. If you dig this show, I would love, and you're watching on Facebook, I'd love for you to click that like button on my page. And if you are watching now live on YouTube or watch this back later, because most people watch these after they go live, because who has time on Wednesday? I said Tuesday again, 2 p.m. Who has time on Wednesday afternoons to hang out for an hour with people, right? Not a lot of folk, but you do. And I'm glad you're here with me. So anyway, if you want to subscribe on YouTube, that would help me out. That'd be great. And if you want to like my page on Facebook, also great. Those are completely optional. Let's do this. So we just got done asking you a pre-show question, and I was kind of intrigued with your answers. But now to go to more the theme of today, it's time for the viewer sound off. Now it's time to hear from you. Viewer sound off. Today's question is, for those of you who just joined us and haven't participated yet, you're welcome to sound off on Facebook or YouTube. I see both of your comments. What is the best team or the best group that you've ever been part of? What's the best team or the best group you've ever been a part of? So this could be a sports team. Maybe you grew up doing the sports. Maybe you do the sports now. And there's a particular team, that softball team, that was really, really good. So that comes to mind. Or you just really jived with the team. Like you just had a lot of fun. Maybe you traveled with the team and you went to different tournaments and you had a blast just being with the team. Maybe you weren't that great, be sure had a good time. Or maybe group. Maybe you think about like a project that you did at work, or a research group in college. That when you think about it, you just have the fondest of memories. Because in a minute here, I want to get into this idea of belonging, feeling like we belong to something, to something larger than ourselves. And I think it's an interesting thought exercise to reflect back on when we have experienced a sense of belonging, when we have experienced like we're really part of a team or a group. So for me, I have a couple things that come up for this. I played basketball all growing up, and I loved being so in high school, as a freshman, I was on the freshman team, and then sophomore and junior year, I was on the JV team, the junior varsity team, and junior year, I was on JV, and then they called you swing, which means you can also go up and play varsity. So I'd play in the JV game earlier in the day, and then I'd go up and be on the varsity team and maybe get some action there. And then my senior year, it was obviously just the varsity team. And I remember that junior year of being primarily on the JV team, one of the better players in the JV team, and then just occasionally playing in the varsity team. And I loved that. That was my favorite season of playing basketball. And maybe in part, it's just because the ego part of me was like, oh, I was one of the best players on the JV team. So that made it fun. And that's true. That is part of why it was an enjoyable experience for me. But I really love my coach. Shout out to Rex if you're watching. I don't think you're watching. Wouldn't that be hilarious though if all of a sudden he pops up? Hey, it's good to see you. That was really a bad impression. Sorry, Rex. Yeah, it was just a really good experience of playing with guys that I really enjoyed, a coach that I really enjoyed. There wasn't a ton of pressure on the team. So varsity, a lot of pressure because those games matter more or less, but JV games didn't really matter. So yeah, I think that's what comes up for me is my role was really important on the team. So I loved that. I really enjoyed the coach and the players. And then it was not a ton of pressure. It was just a relaxed, chill environment. So I think that's my answer to my own question this morning. What's the best team I've been a part of? It was my junior year in high school JV basketball team. All right. What do we got here? Oh, Junior. Hey, Junior. Good to see you, man. Worship band at church. That's a great answer, too. I was a worship pastor for over a decade, and some of my favorite memories of being in groups and teams were absolutely were the worship teams and those. Yeah, so thanks for that pleasant memory. Love those days. Susan Levis says, any choir I've ever sung with. Love that answer. I was in choir in college. A great time. Love the choirs. Brooke says, my family team, which always includes my friends. Ooh, going a little meta there. My friends. Starkovich says, working with other host families in our community as part of the foreign exchange program. That's cool. I love that. Starkovich, what countries have you hosted students from? I'm having a hard time figuring out how to ask that question, but that's what I want to ask. What countries students have you hosted from? Curious about that. Mike says, my team of sandwich artists when I worked at Subway years ago. That's awesome. I love that. It's great, man. Great answer. Barry says, I've always been a bit of a loner, so I can't think of any group that I enjoyed being a member of. Okay, thanks for your honesty. Appreciate you sharing. Roger says, best group is the Onion Ridge. Onion Ridge? Is that really Onion Ridge? Onion Ridge Christian Church in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've never been to Vegas. It's one of like the 4 American cities that I haven't yet been to that I want to go to. Vegas, New Orleans, Washington, D.C., and Boston, I think, are the 4 that I want to go to. Shane says, I haven't been on a lot of offline Online teams count. Offline teams, but I have mostly fond memories of rather brief time singing with a worship band at the previous church. Online, I used to admin a forum with great mods. I love that little reflection on the online group world. And then that's cool that you used to be on a worship band, Shane. Maybe me, you, and Junior can put a little band together sometime. Canyon Ridge. Okay. It wasn't Onion Ridge. I'm like, this is going to be really exciting if you went to a church, Onion Ridge Christian Church, which might exist out there. In fact, somebody Google, is there an Onion Ridge Christian Church out there? But yes, Canyon Ridge sounds, makes more sense. Mercy says, I've worked in a couple of small mental health agencies where we absolutely family. Love that. Cried during case reviews, had each other's back, shared trauma, dark humor, and all small daily boring life stories. Yeah, that's when you know it's a great group, when you just share the mundane, boring stuff, and it's like, it's life-giving. Love that, Merce. Thanks for sharing. Melanie says, I have two, one old, one recent. My college theater did the musical Cotton Patch Gospel. I don't know what that is. And it was such a fun, magical show. And all of us who were involved, a great deal of fondness. The other was a parent support group for newly outed LGBTQ people. The connections are real, and we've really bonded. Love that, Melanie. Love hearing about how those two different groups, like maybe why there was such tight bonds and connection in there. Adette says, mine was a work group. A few years ago, I worked in an advertising agency, and we had a group of 5 superheroes with capes and all. It was the best work group. We made things happen. I love that. I love that there's a connection there between being a part of a group that really gets good work done. That can be a great motivator for being a part of a group. Okay, so John helped me out here. So Tamaki Makura is in Auckland and Aotearoa is New Zealand. All right, so you've lived here for 10 years, moved from Melbourne, Australia in 2011, grew up in a farm in north central Victoria between Colbinebben and Rushworth. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing, John. You just expanded my awareness of the world and of you. What do we got here? Anna says, I did a month-long yoga teacher training in Norway. Was the only person from America. Everyone else is from Norway. English was their second language. In addition to being a surreal experience of being out of my comfort zone, everyone was so supportive and encouraging of each other. I love that. Are you still teaching? Are you teaching yoga now, Anna? Did the training work? And why did you go to Norway to learn? Because I imagine you could learn anyway, so that's kind of fun. Oh, James, what's up, buddy? James was on the VBS planning team at a Methodist church, attended for 6 years. Loved it. Yes, VBS can be a blast, can it? Justin, Onion Ridge helps people cry. I need like a laugh track on here. I've only gotten applause. Oh, it didn't even work. Where'd the A button go? There it is. There's your applause. What's up, Troy? I feel like Troy's relatively new to the crew here. Good to have you. My Christian adult ed and fellowship group. We did so much service together. Love that. It's part of when I think churches get things right, then they create those sort of bonds and groups and connections. Love that. Thanks for sharing. Justin says, SDA Kinship, probably the best team because there's a shared commitment and mission for necessary and challenging work. That's some powerful bonding agents. Speaking of Norway, we've got Informator. So that's fun. So Anna went to Norway to get some yoga training, and Informator is watching from there. That's a fun connection. All right, thanks for the viewer sound off, everyone. Let's go back just to this regular screen here. All right, so if you're just joining us, this is The Altar, and I am your host, Colby Martin, and I stream this live show every Wednesday at 2 p.m. on my YouTube and my Facebook channels. And part of the goal here is to invite us to consider where in our life might we need to change how we think, change how we feel, change how we believe about things. So one of the things that I do on this show is I share my weekly newsletter with you. So I write a weekly newsletter called Perspective Shift, and you can get that at this URL right here, If you go to colbymartin.substack.com, then you can get today's article, which is called When Belonging is Up to You. And then you can peruse and see all the past articles. And you can also enter your email address and subscribe. It's totally free. And every Wednesday morning, I will fire off a new article to you. It's usually around 1,000 to 2,000 words. So, you're looking at maybe a 7-minute investment, depending on your speed of reading. And so then on my show, The Altar, I will throw the article up on the screen and I'll share it. I may not always share the whole thing. But then I invite you to respond and to react and to share your thoughts. As you can already tell, if you've been watching, this is a highly interactive show, as I've been seeing and reading almost all of your comments. And so now, if you have any thoughts you want to share or questions you have as we go along on today's topic, let me know and we'll get into it. So this is the called When Belonging is Up to You. What's the subtitle there? Sometimes we sabotage ourselves. Yes, I agree. Sometimes we sabotage ourselves. So let's dig into this. I'm curious about your thoughts on this. I've gotten a couple great comments and emails already from the newsletter going out this morning. Here's how it begins. As a species, talking about you and me, Homo sapiens, we evolved within tribal communities, which is part of how our species of humans overtook like Neanderthals and Denisovans and other human species, because we figured out how to band together into larger tribes who became dependent upon one another. We weren't looking out just for our own biological offspring, but we began to see the benefit of protecting and supporting and nurturing others who are like us as well. So as a result, as you can imagine, over hundreds of thousands of years of that process, we become like wired for connection. Like we need it for survival, for well-being, to thrive. In short, you might say that we long to belong. But sometimes, I submit to you, we sabotage the possibility of our finding belonging. So let's start here. Thanks to the work of thinkers such as Toko-Pa Turner and Brene Brown, when it comes to being part of a larger group, there's a distinction we can make between the idea of belonging and the idea of fitting in. And so I mentioned Toko-Pa Turner, and this is her book called Belonging. This was probably my favorite read of 2019, Remembering Ourselves Home. Toko-Pa is a Canadian author. I don't know if I have any Canadian viewers at the moment, but shout out to you. Toko-Pa is a Canadian author and dream worker who blends the mystical teachings of Sufism with a Jungian approach to dreams. It's a picture of her on the back there. And anyway, this book just was full of incredible insights about the emotional, social, spiritual world of belonging to ourselves, belonging to each other. Fantastic. And then Brene Brown has a ton of brilliant research as well on the concept of belonging versus fitting in. And so you might make the distinction like this. Fitting in is a process that requires that we hack off or hide or otherwise reject or repress parts of ourselves in order to fit in. So you might have a hole and you might have an object, and in order for the object to fit in the hole, like it has to be edited and adjusted and tweaked in order to fit in. But belonging, by contrast, is when we can just show up fully and truly as we are, no hacking or hiding required, and we receive acceptance and welcome and love from the group. Many churches will claim to, and might even seek to, embody a model of belonging. And what I mean by that is they say, like, everyone belongs, you belong here, or they might even really try, like they might have good intentions to create a community of belonging. But in practical terms, what often ends up happening is they operate more like a fitting in model. And you can see this play out in things like their teaching, such as here, the official beliefs of the church and what we ask you to believe and to sign on the dotted line to become a member, as well as in their practice. Like, here are the list of behaviors that, if you indulge in these, then you're going to threaten your status with the group. So as a result, people discover that in order to belong to the group, as they're told, they first must fit in by adapting particular beliefs and avoiding or adopting particular behaviors. And so what happens is this amounts to a kind of conditional acceptance. You get to be a part of the tribe, you get to be a part of the group, you belong here as long as you stay within the bounds of belief and behavior. And many of you, I'm sure, know firsthand what it's like should you fail to maintain these conditions. Should you fail to continue to believe the things you're supposed to believe and behave the way you're told to behave. Many of you know what it feels like then. It's painful, sad. It's really hard. Some good writing there. It's really hard. As stated a minute ago, we are social creatures and we have this inborn need for connection. Belonging to a group larger than us is a natural desire, and it's also good for us, by the way. Emotionally, it's good for us. Spiritually, physically, it's good for us to belong and to connect with others. So then not having it, not belonging to a group, it's not only hard on us, but it hurts. As social creatures, we thrive in community. We are better together. Loneliness sucks. And if you've ever felt the sting of being ostracized from a community or a church, then you know the kind of suckage that I speak of. Anyway, the point here is to highlight this distinction between belonging and fitting in. So belonging is unearned and unconditional. You just have it. You just, like going back to my talking about being on the basketball team in high school, it's like you just earn the roster spot just by showing up. Look at you. Look at you. You're alive. You get a spot on the team. It's unearned. You didn't have to do anything. Boom, you're in. You belong. And it's unconditional, which is to say you don't have to do anything to prove that you belong here. You don't have to do anything to make yourself fit in or worthy of this. And you really can't lose your spot either. Congratulations. And then whereas fitting, by contrast, fitting in is earned. You gotta hide, hack off, edit, adapt, adopt. It's earned and it's conditional. Like you can lose your spot in the group when it comes to fitting in. We long to belong, which is different than fitting in. But this belonging is easier said than done. And in part, that's due to sometimes external factors. Like that's what I mentioned a minute ago, where the tribe or the community demands fitting in instead of offering belonging. And then other times, belonging is hard because of internal factors. So sometimes the group in question might be incredibly clear in its insistence that you are welcome, you matter, that you belong. And not only are they clear, but they might actually even mean it. So I said a minute ago, sometimes churches, for example, will say that everyone belongs, but they actually operate under a fitting in model. But then there are times where there might be a community or a team or a group or a church that really does offer belonging, this unearned, unconditional sense of belonging, but we can struggle to receive that gift. This gift of belonging, it might be right there in the right on the table for the taking. All you gotta do is just take it. Just here it is. Here's the gift of belonging. But sometimes there are things within us that prevent us from enjoying the gift. Now, really quick, before I go any further, I recognize there is a real risk here of victim blaming. And please know this is not my intent. Please know this is not my intent. But there's a risk here of that, isn't there? I'm not saying that if you don't belong or if you don't feel like you belong to a particular community, then it's your fault. Just you need to just do better, try harder. No, that is not what I'm saying. And in fact, as soon as the article went out this morning, I heard from somebody who gave me some pushback, which I love and I welcome. So thank you for the pushback. And they said it sounds like you're victim blaming. So either A, they didn't read the entire article and hear me say that I'm not victim blaming, or, which is more likely what happened, they did read it all and they still feel like I didn't do enough to put daylight between this idea of blaming a person for not feeling belonging and then what I'm suggesting here in a minute. So I'll just pause and say that yes, when it comes to, as we're going to talk about in a minute, the way that we can take some responsibility for our own sense of belonging, I am conscious that there are myriad ways in which that is not just like as simple as, well, just do it. It's just up to you. Just make it happen. Like there are plenty other factors, external and internal, that make that challenging. So I appreciate the person who emailed and said that it sounded like I was victim blaming, and I totally appreciate and hold space for that feedback. And maybe if I would have written another 1,000 words in this article, I would have given some more acknowledgement to that. But trying to say right out the bat that I hope that what I'm doing today has not come across as just blaming a person for their lack of belonging. So what I'm saying is that sometimes we would do well to examine ourselves, to turn the camera on ourselves, to look in the mirror, and just be open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we might be sabotaging our own potential for belonging. This is what I'm saying here in this next section, is that maybe if we feel like we're struggling to belong in a particular community that for all intents and purposes seems to be giving us the gift of belonging, that maybe there are some ways in which we are responsible, some things that we can do. We might be sabotaging ourselves. All right, I'll pause there since there's a nice big heading before I go into the next section, and just ask if you've got any thoughts or any comments or any questions so far as we go. And since there is a bit of a 15-second or so delay, I know that it might take you a minute to gather your thoughts and write your comments. So I'll turn back to the comments here just to see what we've got so far and wait to see if anybody's got any interaction. Oh, Informator just made a Facebook stream inspired by my conversation with Sean McDowell. Well, I'm glad you were inspired by it, Informator. That was I'll say this about my conversation with Sean. I think Sean is a lovely, genuine, sincere human, and we might be doing some more conversations together in the future. I had that was a rough conversation because I watched the live comments. So when I see it's a live show, I think, oh, well, we're going to be interacting with the people who are watching live, right? And I didn't understand that for Sean necessarily, when he streams live, he doesn't really pay attention to the comments, which is fine. Everybody can do their own thing. But I was, on my end, I was watching the live comments, and I'm like, damn, these folk aren't like all that kind. Sometimes there's a real defensiveness and a real angst and a real energy that can happen in some of those conservative evangelical spaces. So I had an interesting experience. I enjoyed the conversation with Sean. Didn't enjoy so much the peripheral interaction and subsequent comments on the video, but that's all right. I'm used to that in some ways. Okay, Anna responded to my question about teaching yoga. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. Working on finding the joy in it again. All right, well, take your time. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Hey, Tori, glad to have you back. Glad to have you back. Oh, good. I'm so glad, Roger. Yes, you belong here. You belong here. There is no requirements for being a part of these streams. There is expectations that people would conduct themselves with kindness and respect and love. And if at any point anyone violates that, I don't know if I can kick you off. Maybe I can. I can't from this platform. Maybe I can go into YouTube and block you or ban you. But that will happen if anybody is unkind and not thoughtful, and yeah, then it'll get blocked. But other than that, everybody's welcome to be here. Shane says, yeah, definitely can relate to that. I can see quite a few reasons why I would be self-sabotaging, such as being afraid, indecisive, overly secretive for some examples. I love that, Shane. That's some quick introspection you just did right there. Thanks for sharing. John adds that Hugh McKay, an Australian social researcher, was saying years ago the fundamental human need people were looking for is belonging. I haven't heard of Hugh McKay, but I affirm affirm their assessment. That strikes me as what I've learned as well to be really, really important for people. Yeah, James. James says sometimes feeling like you don't belong is due to low self-esteem. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like so when I think of low self-esteem, I think of feeling like you don't even belong to yourself. Like you're not even worthy of the space that you take up just as you, is sometimes the root of that low self-esteem. So if you or anyone, can't, has a hard time accepting that you are worthy of just taking up the space that you take up, then yeah, it would be doubly hard to feel like you can take up space in a group as well. So that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that. I've seen myself as an atheist, Informator says, for some years now, but now I wonder if I might be able to view myself as a Christian again. The gatekeeping attitude is really the issue. Yeah, I I hear you. I will often go back and forth on being like, why do I keep using this term again? Because there's just so many people in the world that also use this term, this identity marker, that just aren't representative of how I see the Christian faith. So I get that a lot. Troy adds this, because of my own trauma and internalized shame, I've struggled to accept sincere attempts to belong and have sometimes fallen back into old habits of hiding or hacking off parts of myself to fit in. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Because we're going to talk about here in a minute, belonging is scary and vulnerable. So even though a community might offer belonging, we still might choose fitting in. We still might choose to edit ourselves or to be someone different, because belonging requires that we just fully show up as we are, and that can be a lot. Yeah, and Susan adds, me too, really working on it, but it's tough. I am with you, Troy and Susan. We three will work on it together. All right, let's go to this next section here. Belonging can be scary and vulnerable. Who's with me? The story that we often tell ourselves is that we want to belong to this group, but they're just making it so I can't. Now, some of you have already, like Shane and James and Troy, you've already acknowledged, no, I can see how it's me that's not sort of allowing belonging to happen here. But other times, and this might be myself in previous iterations of my life, the story we tell ourselves is, hey, I want to belong to this group, but they're just not letting me. Like, they're making it so I can't. When maybe the deeper reality for some of us sometimes might be, and this one can be hard and scary to name, is that we are sabotaging our own capacity for belonging. And instead of looking in the mirror, we end up blaming others. There's a story in the Gospel of John where Jesus came upon a man who had been sick for 38 years. And Jesus asked the man, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? And you might think that's just Jesus being a bit cheeky or asking a rhetorical question, like, of course he wants to get well. But I actually think it's a genuine question to ask. Like, do you truly actually want to get well? I don't know that is that obvious of an answer. I don't. I've got a link there in the article from this morning to a sermon that I gave a couple years ago, where I talked about how sometimes we are more comfortable in the storm than we are the prospect of the peace after the storm. So there's another story where Jesus is in the boat with some of his friends, and there's this great storm, and the disciples wake up Jesus, and he calms the storm. And it's after he calms the storm that he turns to his friends, and he's like, why are you so afraid? And, I've always read that and thought, like, why are you afraid of the storm? But I noticed that the why are you afraid question comes after the storm had been calmed. And so I reflected a couple years ago, like, man, sometimes it's scarier to imagine the peace after the storm, because at least many times we know ourselves in the midst of the storm. We know ourselves in the midst of the storm. Like, I'm a victim of this, and I'm comfortable with that status as a victim. I know my suffering. I know that. I know that story well. I'm sure I can maybe see that it's not the best story, but at least I'm familiar with it. And so the prospect of healing, the prospect of getting well is scary, because who am I if I'm not the person with this story? Who am I if I'm not the person with this affliction? This guy's been sitting next to the pool here for 38 years. He's had, like, his identity is pretty well established at that point. If he gets healed, if he becomes whole, like, who is he? So Jesus says, do you want to get well? Do you? Sometimes the prospect of healing can be scary. And the man says back to Jesus, I don't have anyone who can put me in the water. I don't know why that's his voice. I don't know. No one can put me in the water when it's stirred up. The legend there in that story is that there was a pool that anytime the water was stirred, it's because an angel mixed it up, and whoever gets to go in next gets healed. And he says, someone else always gets in ahead of me. And I write here that this guy took a page out of my book. Immediately project blame onto someone else for the state of my unhealth. I'm really good at this. I'd be much farther down the road on such and such if it weren't for old so-and-so. My suffering is not my fault. It's their fault. My lack of health is not my fault. It's their fault. Oh, sure. I'd love to get well, but someone else always beats me to it. What can I do? Why do we do this? And maybe you don't. Maybe you're more evolved than I am, or maybe you have different levels of immaturity. But this is my particular breed. Why do we do this? Why might we not necessarily want to get well? And as a result, then blame others. And I suggest that maybe it's because, as beautiful as true belonging can be, and like we talked about a minute ago, like, it is core to who we are. It is a deep need. As beautiful as it can be, the road to get there, that can be real scary and vulnerable. It's scary because it requires that we show up fully and entirely and truly as we are, not as we pretend to be. If you're anything like me, you might spend a lot of time and energy wearing masks, projecting images into the world of who we want people to think we are. But true belonging requires that we shed those masks and we just be ourselves. And that's terrifying. And then second, true belonging is vulnerable. Since we show up as we are, in theory, alongside others who are showing up as they are, true belonging can lead to this genuine connection. And that's awesome. And that leads to meaningful relationships, which is beautiful. But if you've ever had authentic connection like this and then had it broken, that's the worst. That's the actual worst. As if you've had like legit human vulnerable connection with another person. Like true relational intimacy. Where you are you and they are they, and you see each other, and then something happens to rupture that relationship. That is the worst. That is a pain unlike many other pains. And so then oftentimes what can happen, and this is true for me, is then as a defense mechanism to keep that from happening again, it's just safer to keep people at arm's length. Like I don't want to go through that again. I'm going to avoid that heartbreak. Now, I'm not saying that this is all conscious, that we intentionally and consciously sabotage our own efforts to belong. But I think when you consider how scary it is and how vulnerable it can be, I have no doubt that we might subconsciously sometimes be avoiding accepting belonging because of these two factors. And I want to say it makes a lot of sense. Like, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you would sort of naturally not want to do a thing that's super scary, and you would want to do something maybe to protect yourself. Those things make sense. All right, last section break here, and I'll just check out the comments to see if to see who else has some thoughts. Oh, Angela, this is a great comment. There's always a cost to belonging. Sometimes it's worth paying it, and sometimes it isn't. I like your thoughts there, Angela. I wonder if you'd be willing to say. I wonder if you'd be willing to say more about what cost would not, when it would not be worth paying it. And you don't have to if that feels too vulnerable. But I think it's a great observation. Okie Fun over on YouTube says, it seems we can belong even if we disagree on many issues. That is, we may not necessarily fit in, but we do indeed belong. You get a gold star, Okie. In fact, that is precisely one of the points that I tried to make at my church in this little 4-part series that I just finished called It All Belongs within the context of religious diversity, or religious diversity within community. And that is like the beautiful thing where belonging can happen in the context of great diversity and diversity of faith and belief. Like people can believe different things and still belong to each other. This like 100% can happen. And at our church, I would suggest to you that it does happen. Thanks, Tori. Me too. I love talking about this stuff. Shane, I love your honesty, brother. I've definitely been on the blaming others end of things too. And honestly, there'll probably be some point in the future where I'll do it again. Same. What I hope to do though is I hope to be shortening the time between when I do the projection and the blaming to then when I realize that I've done that thing. Like I hope that time gets shorter and shorter. I don't know that I'll ever sort of be enlightened enough to not do the initial reactive blame and projection, but I can shorten that time, and then I can increase how much I then take that awareness and pivot it towards something good, which might oftentimes include apologies. I agree, Tori. You got to be open to change, to believe you can belong. Stamp that with the true stamp. I need a digital stamp to stamp true. Yeah, James, you're not alone, man. As a gay person, I'm constantly meeting new people and then worry about how they're going to react. And that is, you're touching on that part of our culture that is about fitting in, right? So belonging is, yeah, you're gay, cool. So what does that have to, like, it's great. You still belong here. Fitting in is, oh yeah, I don't know about that. That's weird. Or if it's a religious group, that's sinful, or whatever it is. That's garbage. Oh, this is great. Angela responded back. Thanks, Angela. It's too much when it pulls us into unhealthy territory. Well said. Codependency and abusive relationships are great examples of belonging costing too much. Yes, thank you. I'm ringing the bell of goodness. That makes a ton of sense. Yes. Balance with all things. Well said. All right. Y'all are fun today. I like you. Let's wrap this up. Do you want to belong? So I've seen this many times at our church where we preach this message over and over and over again about belonging, and we repeatedly insist you belong here. However, we still will occasionally hear from folks who feel, I don't belong. I feel like I don't belong. And it's not uncommon that through the course of conversations, we discover that the root cause in this particular instance is their lack of, the root cause of them feeling like they don't belong is one of the two things that I mentioned above. Because they're holding it back themselves because of how scary it is and how vulnerable it is. And again, the goal here is not to victim blame, not saying it's anyone's fault. There are oftentimes very good reasons, like I mentioned. You've been hurt before. Yeah, you're going to put up walls. Or like Angela brought up, like there are some contexts in which belonging is actually not the right move for you because you are experiencing a sort of abusive context, or you're losing too much of yourself in a codependency way. So the goal here is not victim blaming at all. There are other valid reasons why a person may not feel like they belong, even in a community that insists you do belong here. But I've also at the same time seen it too many times to ignore that maybe the person in question can be their own worst enemy when it comes to their own belonging. And this is why I think Jesus aimed straight at the heart of the matter with the guy, and he said, do you want to get well? So perhaps today, my friends, if you've been feeling like you don't belong somewhere, if there's a group or a team or a church or a community or something that you have been trying to maybe build certain connections with, or wanting to like have some, like you want to belong in this group, but you feel like you haven't, that may be the question just to ask yourself, not in a blamey way, but in a personal responsibility, is like, do you want to belong? Like you say you do, but do you? Like for reals? Do you want to belong? Are you ready to open yourself up? Are you ready to open yourself up in authenticity and vulnerability and risk making your true self known? Because that's what it takes. That's what true belonging is. Are you prepared to risk making connections with people who then also will open themselves up to you? Are you prepared to sit with them in their messiness? Sit with them in their pain, sit with them in all of their junk, and withhold your judgment. Because it's a two-way street. You can't just be like, I want belonging. I want no judgment and acceptance, but also I'm going to ask you to fit in and you to fit in, and I'm going to judge you. Like, it's a two-way street. Are you prepared for that? Can you accept the fact that other people belong in the same way that you do? Are you open to the possibility? Are you open to the possibility that you might get hurt again? Because human relationships are messy. And they're always vulnerable to fissure and fracture. And like I said, I understand this instinct to just shutter up the doors to our hearts and keep people out. But I also know that this posture leads to loneliness and disconnection. So, friend, do you want to belong? Do you? Punk? I don't know why I went all Clint Eastwood there. Because it might be possible that the reason you don't feel like you belong somewhere is because you're not letting yourself. It might be possible. It might be possible that you're holding out, that you're too scared to actually receive belonging, to trust that it is real, to receive it, to test it out. And so maybe your challenge is this. Next time you're in a context, you're in a group, you're in a situation where you want to, hope to, wish to feel like you belong, just whisper under your breath or in your own head, I belong here. I belong here. I belong here. Because at the end of the day, no one can do that work for you. No one can force you to belong. You must own it. You must receive it. And you must choose to believe it. Okay? So that is today's article over at my Substack page. Again, you can get that at that link below. And that is the end. Yep. Then I ask you, what do you think? Have you ever felt like you didn't fit in somewhere? And you can feel free to head to the article online here and respond to any of these questions if you want. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Have you ever felt like you didn't fit in? What was that like? Have you ever experienced true belonging, where you got to be fully yourself and accepted and loved just as you are? What was that like? Can you identify a time in your life where you might have sabotaged your own sense of belonging? Some of you shared that here today, and I think that's really, really lovely. How did you deal with that, or are you still working on it? And then I invite you to push back on my thoughts, like one person did when they emailed me today and said, like, I feel like you're not taking enough into consideration that sometimes people have legitimate blocks within them. That could be mental blocks. It could be just social inhibitions. Like there are other factors at play, and 100% I affirm that. And I tried to name that, but I could have done a better job in the article of holding space for that. But what I wanted, like the main point here, and I hope the main point got across, well, two main points, right? Belonging versus fitting in. But then the other main point of I do believe that there will come a point when it comes to belonging where we have to accept it, where we have to test it out, where we have to do our part. People can't force us to experience belonging. They can create the conditions, they can set the table, they can do everything in their power, but we can't force people to feel like they belong. There are ways in which sometimes we hold it back from ourselves, and it makes sense. It does. And so that's why sometimes the question is, Do you want to get well? Do you want to belong? Oh, good, Angela. I'm glad. I feel that way too. Hey, Mike. I appreciate that. Oh, Angela has this interesting question. Are you familiar with Gottman's Four Horsemen? Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I'm not, but I like that. Those are all words. Those are all words that describe me really well. They're acts of self-protection that can keep us from being vulnerable enough to do the head and heart work that belonging requires. Ooh, I love that. I'm going to have to add that to my repertoire. All right, let's close it out today, friends, with today's altar call. Are you ready? That's right. Trigger warning. We do altar calls here at the altar, but it's altar with an E. It's different. So for today's altar call, and the point of this segment is to invite you to consider rethinking something, to come forward to the altar of ideas and sacrifice perhaps an idea that needs to die and pick up and go with you into the world with a new sense of purpose and charge. So today's altar call has to do with the flipping of a coin. Flipping of a coin. Imagine you're flipping a coin. Heads on one side, tails on the other. It's a 50-50 random chance, right? Whether it's going to be heads or tails. 50-50. There's two options. It's going to be one of the two. It's 50-50, heads or tails. And also bonus points for anyone who can tell me what that GIF is of. It is one of my top 4 favorite shows of all time. Even watching the GIF now, I'm like, oh, I feel like I want to go watch that show tonight. But yeah, so coin flips, like it's a 50-50 split, right? It's just random. You flip it in the air, gonna get heads, gonna get tails over the course of the time, 50 times, right? Well, no, perhaps not right. The math suggests it's not the case. So Percy Diaconis, who's a math and statistics professor at Stanford a number of years ago, did the maths, did some tests, ran some research, and discovered, and I don't know if you can read the abstract there, it's a little bit tiny depending on the screen you're on, but the abstract says that we analyze the natural process of flipping a coin which is caught in the hand. And so not drop to the floor and left to spin, but just flip head over tails. We prove that vigorously flipped coins are biased to come up the way they started. And then that little highlighted section there. For natural flips, the chance of coming up the same direction as which it started is about 51. It's not a 50-50 split. It's not random 50-50. It's 51-49 favored for whichever side head or tails is facing up. And I watched another guy on YouTube describe it like this. Just picture how if you start with heads up and it flips once, informator. Bonus points. It was Peaky Blinders was the clip from a minute ago. If you flip a coin and it starts on heads and you do one full revolution, you get heads and tails, and they each have shown themselves one time. Head then tails one time. Flip again, heads then tails 2 times. But on just a half flip, now you have one more head. So over the course of a time, you will always either have equal head tails or one more head show than tails. There's another way to think about it. So it's actually not a random. It's not 50-50. So if you're ever doing a coin flip and they ask you to call it, like the odds are going to be weighted towards whatever side is showing up when the flip occurs. So then why does that matter? What's the call? And here is how the altar call works. So now I say, what's the call? What's the thing? Now that you've come forward and you're ready to give your life, what is the call? The call is this. Even when things seem random, even when things seem entirely out of your hands, I got no control, it's just 50-50, it's totally random. Who knows? It might do this, it might do that. Even if it seems that way, there might still be something you can exercise control over. There might be. If you're the one flipping the coin, you can decide if it's heads facing up or tails facing up first. And then you get to decide a little bit which is favored. And so in my mind, as we talked about belonging today, there are a ton of factors outside of your control. external factors like, is this community actually doing the model of fitting in, where they force you to hack off parts of yourself or hide parts of yourself? You can't control that. Do you have particular neurological divergencies that make certain social situations really, really complicated for you, or make certain mental connections more challenging than a neurotypical person? You can't control that. Did you come out of context as a childhood where there was particular types of trauma and baggage and conflict? Like, you can't control that. There are a lot of factors, external, internal, that when it comes to belonging, that we simply just cannot, they're out of our hands. A lot of it's random, and a lot of it's just up to chance. And, ... at the same time, there also might be some things we can do. There also might be some things we can do to exercise, to what can we control in this situation? What influence can we exert? What bravery can we show up with? What courage can we offer? What help can we get? What therapist can we go to? What spiritual director can we talk to? What books can we read to help learn about ourselves? Do we want to get well? Do we want to belong? Can we ask that question honestly and be prepared to hear the answer and other ways that we're sabotaging? So anyway, that's my altar call for you today. Coin flips are not random. It's 5149, which for me is just a reminder that even when everything seems entirely out of your hands, entirely random, there still also might be something in which you can exercise control over and take some personal responsibility. I love this, Susan. I can feel the feels and keep stepping forward. That's what you can do. Exactly. That is the thing you can do. Feel the feels and just do the next right thing. That's it. So many things you can't control. Hey, Tommy Star, no worries. You did miss us. We're done here, but this will replay on YouTube and Facebook. That's all right. Same with you, Susan. Just go. You know how it works. Facebook usually takes about an hour to sort of reprocess it. YouTube is a little quicker, but these live in perpetuity. Oh, that's some real key. Ben Cohen's, tell me what that means. What is that in reference to? Although I don't know how long I'm going to wait. I'll wait because I'm really curious. Oh, you also say, where have you been all my whole life? I don't know. I've been in Albany, Oregon from 0 to 19. I've been in Salem, Oregon from 19 to, I don't think you really wanted to know this, 19 to 23. I've been in Gilbert, Arizona from 24 to 29. And then I've been in San Diego for the last decade almost. I'm 39 now. So that's where I've been. That's where I've been, Ben. Oh, thank you, Brooke. So glad. All right. If you are with me still here and you have availability tonight, I invite you to come back to the YouTube or to the Facebook, because my wife and I do a live podcast called The Kate and Colby Show. And tonight we are going to be joined by Susan Cottrell. Do you know who Susan Cottrell is? Okay, Susan Cottrell is many things. She founded Freed Hearts, which is an organization that equips and empowers and creates belonging for parents of LGBTQ individuals. And she also is the one who did that TED Talk a couple years ago, where the premise is that she chose her child over the evangelical church, and it's been viewed like 1.5 million times. Fantastic TED Talk. Kate and I have known her for several years now and is a friend of ours, and we're really stoked to have Susan join us tonight, 7 p.m. Pacific on The Kate and Colby Show. Please come back. Speaking of coming back, come back next Wednesday. I'll be here for the altar, 2 p.m. Oh, Ben, that's what you're referencing. The poet who wrote the Feel But Keep Moving poem. Susan, did you know that? Did you mean to be referencing a Rilke poem? Feel But Keep Moving. I love that. I'm going to go look that up. All right. I love you all. Be well. We'll see you next week.